Has a giant sea monster just been sighted in the Thames? This is All Things Creepy. Let's begin. So this photograph was taken and posted to Reddit by user apes. He states that several days ago he saw something in the Thames and took this picture, and yeah, it's quite an unusual one. Naturally, we have the classic murky brownish water of the Thames, and then what appears to be, initially at least, something's head emerging or submerging from the water. There's ripples around it showing that it is interacting with the water. It's very unlikely to be a Photoshop, although of course, as we know, AI is getting quite sophisticated in current times. But in my opinion, this is not Photoshop or AI generation. I simply don't see any of those telltale signs, the artifacting, just small details, warping on the image, various things like that aren't present. So it leads me to believe that this is very likely a genuine photograph. As for the centerpiece of the photograph, if you will, it's of course brown in colour. Most marine life tends to follow this trend where they're at the very least dark on the top of their body, just to make it more difficult for anything viewing them from above the surface of the water to actually identify them as a living thing. So that does murk the waters, because in nature stuff is trying to not look like a living animal. It's trying to blend in and be camouflaged, blend in with rocks, wood, plants, all sorts of things like that. And then of course we have the eye, this reddish small eye set quite heavily into the head, as you would see in an animal. And yeah, it's quite a frightening image. Immediately it resembles to me perhaps a salamander. Of course we have the giant Asian salamanders, the Japanese, and I think there's a Chinese version as well, and they have that flattened head, that typical large amphibian flattened head that we see through prehistoric history and with modern salamanders as well. But then of course we have the murkiness of the Thames, which throws a bit of a spanner in the wrench, because of course we can't actually see the rest of this animal, if of course it is an animal. I've seen many suggestions that this could be a gigantic snake. Now if that is the case, its body would be huge, right? Because this is quite a large head. As we said, it looks like the flattened head of a salamander, whose heads are proportionally quite big compared to the body. But if this is a snake, it would have to have a very thick, long tail, if you will. And that's quite scary, because an animal that size could really do some damage. Now, what would an animal that size be doing in the frigid waters of the Thames? I mean, beats me. It is summer at the moment, so although it's typical British weather where it's raining and not particularly hot during summer, it's at least not cold, right? I think a reptile would definitely be able to survive at least these few months without keeling over. As to whether it's a snake, there was also an interesting post that I've seen going around of snake skins, giant snake skins that have been shed, found in the Thames recently as well. So potentially some correlation there. Of course, the story as old as time, one that Florida, unfortunately, over in the States, has been suffering with quite badly. An owner gets an exotic pet, a snake. They get it small. It gets bigger and bigger. Naturally, they can't house it anymore. They can't look after it, so they get the bright idea to release it into the wild. Now, if you're in a large, densely populated area such as London, you can easily just chuck it in the Thames. I know it sounds not very nice, but there have been piranhas found in the Thames, turtles, frogs, invasive frog species, all sorts of things have been found in there. I wouldn't put it past someone doing this, to be honest. Now, whether this actually is a snake, snakes do tend to have that darkened pattern on the top of their head. They tend to be a bit more colourful in general. Of course, this does vary between species, but for the most part, there's very few that are just sort of a solid brown. But then again, things affect this. I'm imagining colder weather would probably cause some of the colours to flush out or darken. So I definitely wouldn't rule it out because of that. Now, would a snake be poking its head out of the water like this? Yeah, it's possible. I mean, anacondas do a very similar thing. They're very used to swimming in the water, and of course they do breathe air, so they'll occasionally poke their head out to get some air, slither back in. That's something that they do all the time in the wild. And then of course, outside of conventional animals, we have the cryptozoological argument. Could this be an unidentified species? The only spanner in the works is this is the Thames. It's not in the Amazon. It's not in the middle of nowhere. Even in the UK, it's not in one of the more remote regions, such as the classic Loch Ness. This is the Thames, densely populated area, water that is analysed constantly, you know, whether it's for its clarity, its cleanliness, and for the animals inside. You know, conservationists and ecologists are constantly checking out what is in the Thames. Of course, it is connected to the sea, so there's always that wild card of something unusual slithering its way up from the deep ocean, if you will. But in my opinion, that really makes it unlikely that this is some kind of unidentified species that has just naturally occurred here or been here for a long time. I think we can safely rule that out without further evidence. As for what I think, I mean, I'm liking the snake theory. I think that is quite interesting, and the large snake skins do add some validity to it. I also like the amphibian theory as well, the giant salamander, because of course salamanders over there, they live in the streams, although it's a lot cleaner water. It's definitely the sort of temperatures that they can tolerate. Now that I've said that, I don't think they like dirty water, so if it is one, it's probably not going to live very long, so there's that. And they're also quite endangered, so I think the chance of slipping one into the country, let alone managing to release it into the Thames, that's quite unlikely as well, but who knows. But what I think is probably the most plausible explanation, I think this is, and it's going to be a bit of a party pooper answer, but I think this is a wooden post, okay? Look at it, think about it for a second, with some kind of nail or screw, you know, hammered or screwed into the top of the post. And naturally, because it's underwater, it's constantly getting eroded, you know, worn down over time, giving it that gnarled look, making this screw or nail or whatever it is look more sunken into it. And that's just what's going to happen over time to a man-made structure underwater. Of course, the Thames is heavily built up on. It's been around for ages, and it's been like that for ages. So this could be a very old piece of wood, or an old example of some sort of human-built structure that has maybe fallen in to the water, maybe an old piece of pier that has collapsed over time. It could be a number of things like that. I've seen some people suggesting that maybe it's a rock, which is possible, but in my opinion, it's doesn't really resemble a rock. You know, the darkness of the colour. Of course, there are some rocks that resemble that. A lot of, you know, igneous rocks, things like that, are a bit darker in shade, but usually they wouldn't be found in a body of water like the Thames. And to me, it's just got those sort of etches and patterns that you'd find on wood grain, you know, especially wood that has been carved into a certain shape or manipulated and then worn down back to its more primal, if you will, the base of its structure underneath. So in my opinion, that's what it is. Very loosely, of course, it could be one of the other suggestions, and this has only been seen for a few days, so maybe some more information will come out, maybe other sightings will pop up at different points along the Thames. It'll be interesting to see what happens. By all means, if you've heard anything about this, if you've got any other theories, let me know in the comments below. Like the video if you did, share it with a friend, and of course, if you haven't already, subscribe for more creepy content.